I'm with three members of the States, one constable, one deputy and one senator, so to make it absolutely fair, we're going to discuss the proposed Electoral Commission reforms, as everybody knows about them, everybody's heard about them, discussed them, most people have attended the meetings. On the name boards in front of you, you've got, for no particularly unkind reason, but it's part of the discussion, the number of votes each of you got at the last time you were elected. And this is one of the issues, because they're trying to make it more equal and fair, that people who are in the state should represent a similar number of people. Do you feel any of you disadvantaged or advantaged because you've got more votes or fewer votes? Does it affect the way you behave in the state? Deputy, Senator?
No, I don't think so. I think that we all, well, certainly I don't feel very sort of disadvantaged. I mean, I moved from being deputy to, or, you know, sort of moving from deputy to senator because I was doing quite a lot of all-Ireland work, and particularly with PAC and the Corporate Affairs Scrutiny Panel. And, you know, I thought, okay, it's time to have a crack at it.
Of course, you have the advantage of having the greatest number of the three here, and because senatorial elections invariably finish up with 6, 7 plus top this time.
Yes, I mean
17,000. So inevitably, because it's all right, you're going to have more votes.
I don't know what percentage-wise of the voting population, or you know, I don't know how this compares to the other two. I haven't worked it out.
Deputy, do you feel inferior? The weakest link is you do because you've got the fewest number of votes. Does it make any difference?
No, it makes no difference at all. I obviously did think several times about seeking to become a senator, but I quite like being rooted in a constituency and taking an interest in broader issues. I had no problem with that.
Constable, you're relatively new, but...
Relatively new, I feel a bit of the junior partner here, or somewhat, being the youngest of the three. Maybe only just
Yes.
being the youngest of the three. No, I don't feel disadvantaged at all. I feel quite proud and honoured to represent people in St Brellards. I think the number on my tag here, 1999, 2,000 people. I mean, it gives me a mandate to represent those within the states. But I know I've got a role as well to support and represent people island wide as well, though, and it's not just about the parish. It is also about representing island wide.
Is it not, because this is part of the manifesto, this is part of the document that we're presented with, the reform is necessary because there is this inequality. Now, if you don't feel it, who's feeling this inequality? Where is it? Where is it real or imagined? The representation that you want?
Well, I think the one thing that I think that we've got to remember that in effect, in the end, all politics is local politics. People will talk about the big issues, but in the end, it's the little things that affect them personally that really matter. Does the street light at the end of the road work? You know, that sort of thing. I'm sorry, the rest of your question was?
Well, we'll to pick up on it. Does the inequality, is it a cause, the reform that's being proposed, one of the reasons for it is there is this inequality. But if you're not experiencing it, who is? Who's experiencing it?
Well, I think it's got to be looked at in a cumulative sense. There's an inequality in the sense, Mike, that the rural areas are probably overrepresented vis-a-vis the urban areas. That's where the inequality...
But it's an on-paper unfairness.
Well, no, it's not an on-paper fairness because there's no doubt, and it came out at some of the election reform meetings, the rural area takes a different view. They tend to be more conservative in their view. For example, they tend to be interested in, not all the time, but I don't want to suggest that everyone in the rural area is the same. They clearly are not. But they tend to be interested in conservation issues and environment issues and so forth. And there's obviously more of a traditional side to it because it was Jersey's countryside, it was Jersey's farming community, and of course for decades and decades it was dominant, basically because you had this progression through the honorary system, through the policing side of the system, through the other roles people played, and then you ended up in one of the political offices.
You feel, Constable, there is an inequality that needs to be addressed?
There is an inequality that needs to be addressed. I don't think that there's a question of that. I wouldn't have put a representation that I didn't if I didn't feel that was the case. and I've supported the electoral districts that the Commission have put forward. But I've also supported the fact that the constables need to stay in. In saying that, that's where the compromise exists. And if you keep the parish link, you keep those strong parish values that I think are important, that's a compromise you have to make, and it's one I'm prepared to accept. But I do admit there are some that feel disadvantaged, that don't feel they've got an equal number of people representing them, which is where I think Senator Barsh has tried to put forward the proposals he's put forward. But for me, that compromise with the constables is the compromise I think that's worth keeping.
You hinted there, you already support the idea of large constituencies, the 6 constituencies idea. You grasped with that. You're going with that part.
Well, I went with that with my commission in my commission representation.
Right.
I'm not going to back off from that now. I think there's some anomalies beginning to be thrown up in terms of the numbers of people that are representing people in each district. But again, there are some compromises to make even within that. But if you're looking at the numbers of people in each district and the numbers that are representing them, it's more equal than it is at the present.
But you want it with constables? The second option of the 2 options that you're on
It's the second option that I.
Plan A and Plan B, Deputy? Plan A and Plan B?
Well, I've argued with a couple of deviations or routes. I've argued for Plan A because I think the logic of the Electoral Commission report is Plan A, and it would totally undermine their logic if they went for Plan B. And in fact, if the referendum were to be won and on behalf of the constables, I think you'd have to rejig the whole structure. It strikes me as very odd to make one argument and then by the constables staying, and we'll have to wait for the referendum, you've then got all those principles overturned. It just doesn't make sense.
It's emerging at the discussions around the parishes, there's an awful lot of unresolved matters which go with the package. Would you Plan A, Plan B or neither, Senator?
Well, I think you've got to take a step back, and there's 2 angles on this one. One, the fact that, as Roy has said, you've got the country element, which is very agricultural, very Jersey. And then you've got the urban element, which, and with the best will in the world, quite a lot of people come into the island and don't understand why we've got such a cockamamie system. And until they actually understand it, they think it's, really a bit weird. But I think we find with a lot of people who come over, eventually they do understand it and they do see the value of it. But at the moment we have this sort of a town versus country sort of thing where, it's people from outside. I mean, I'm an immigrant. I mean, yes, I've been here 40 years, but I'm an immigrant. And it took me a while to sort of cotton on to how things worked. So that's one side of it.
Right.
The other side of it is that inside, you talked about inequalities and people getting all steamed up. When we had a committee system, the whole of the assembly was the executive. Now that we have this ministerial system, we have a legislature and an executive. It's sort of borderline Westminster style. And obviously people who have been in for some time haven't really got used to, or haven't perhaps identified the fact that they are no longer part of the executive.
But like the electorate is going to be asked, so it seems either Plan A or Plan B, 6 constituencies with or without constables.
I think it would be desperate if we lost the Connétables, the Comte des Étables.
Right.
But that's another story.
Because if Plan A was adopted, you'd all 3 be out of the States. All 3 categories would disappear. Plan A completely new creature would come along, a member for a constituency.
Yes, I mean, Plan B is the Connétables and the, for want of a better word, deputies.
It would come along for these 2, but it wouldn't come along for me.
It would if it was Plan A. Because
if Plan A comes along, I will carry on. I will carry on as a connoisseur,
but not as a States member.
But not as a States member,
That's right.
and I'm going to make that quite clear.
Yeah.
That option doesn't appear for me.
No.
If the constables go out the States, then I go out the States.
Is that an acceptable alternative for you? Is that an acceptable option?
I made a decision 2 years ago that constable was a position that best suited my abilities. For me to change from that now would be suicide in terms of politically. I will say.
How near to a compromise is that for you, Senator? constables only in their parishes, not in the states. How near a compromise is that?
Well, I think it's really what the referendum comes up with. You know, I will listen to what people say. And if the referendum says, OK, this is what the island as a whole wants, then obviously, you know, that is the way we should go.
Well, obviously we'll listen to the referendum, but there is many a slip twixt cup and lip, in the sense that a lot depends on the majority that the states will fix for the referendum, and
Yes.
obviously the wording. I mean, we've heard that issue discussed without any resolution, I should add,
We've heard
ad nauseum.
This is where I have puzzlement with elected representatives. We've heard the word mandate referred to. Are you waiting to be mandated on this issue, on these sorts of issues, or are you going to say your piece and people will follow what you say?
I've always said my piece. I think the irony is the constables perform a valuable role. There are several pioneering constables in whose presence, one of whom we are at the moment, and that's not just grovelling for its own sake, you know, who are really pushing the boundaries, who are getting involved with their community, who are developing new services, who are seeing gaps, the things that we've all wanted to see with the parishes, and we continue to want to see. But to say that, and to say they shouldn't be in the states, is not treachery. There's no treachery to that. And in fact, I just don't see the logic of the argument. And the voters of St Brelade's, of course, spoke to that argument of saying, you know, there's a fantastic and a big job to do in the parishes, but somehow you can combine that with the big job to do in the states, where we know our responsibility for cross-parish, in other words, actually island issues, is greater and greater. We are in very turbulent waters at the moment, nationally and internationally, and we have to be much more focused on how we deal with those issues.
Because in other political systems, politicians would be leading on this. They'd be setting an agenda for their electorate to vote on. This isn't happening. Politicians are staying in the background to a large extent. So will you wait for people to come knocking on your door and say, this is what we want to do, or are you going to say to them, this is what I'm recommending?
My inclination, quite honestly, is to keep the connotabs in the States, because I think they perform a very useful role. They're a sort of balancing common sense section. If the island was run with the same competence that the connotabs run their parishes, then we wouldn't be worrying about where the next penny's coming from.
You're prepared to let the senators disappear? That's not
Well, I have no option on that. They're going to disappear anyway. Now that they've chopped the senators down to 8, they will just wither on the vine, sadly. I think this is the problem. You see, people, or most people, seem to be thinking in terms of Westminster, or the Westminster model. And having spent quite a lot of time in America, I like the American model, where you have the congressmen voted there every 2 years. They're voted in. The senators are voted in, a third of them every 2 years. But the interesting thing about that is you talk about democratic deficits and things like that. Rhode Island, which is very small, has 2 senators. Texas has 2 senators. Now, who's telling me there's a democratic deficit?
We discussed that in the context, because the arrangement that's being proposed here sounds like a huge deficit for St Helier. If your electorate, or parish electorate, came knocking on your door and said they didn't want constables in the state constable, would you go along with that? Would you be mandated? If they held a parish meeting here, as they can do, set up a meeting and say that the item on the agenda is to constables shouldn't be in, would you go along with that?
Well, that's something I'm going to try to do. I think I need to have a sounding of what parishioners want from me. If they feel that my role was not in the States, then I would have to listen to them. But I don't get that feeling. The people I talk to very much want us to stay in the States. I still think that there is a minority in this island that feel that it's not the place of the constables in the States, and I think the vast majority of people still want us there. The fact is that I think they're too quiet, and I think they need to get working on and supporting us. If that's how they feel, they want the island to go. But don't get me wrong, I understand the other argument about us not being there and the fact that we could fulfil a bigger role within the parish. Individually, we've got to do what we think's right. I'm one of those people that splits my time, I'm not going to say 50-50 because it's different every week and it's different every month. But to do what I need to do what I need to do in the States, I have to do an awful lot of time. I have to do an awful lot of hours to fit that in. I'm 53, I'm not 73. I've got that enthusiasm to do it. And that's why I wanted to get elected at the age I was, because I knew it was going to be an awful lot of work and I didn't want to miss out on the state side of it, and I don't think I do. So I think you can do both roles, but I think you've got to be extremely committed and prepared to give that time up.
Do you think the referendum, when it comes, would be better just to have a simple question? Either you want the 6 large constituencies as a simple question on its own, and another question, which is a separate question, not linked to that, you want the constables to stay. In other words, not linked, because it seems to be, as I expressed it the other night in one of the meetings, people are saying the only option they've got to say they want to keep the constable is to link it to large constituencies. They can't separate the two.
Well, in a way, of course, I think certain members of the Commission have been quite canny, because I get the impression they lost the argument on the constables in terms of the intellectual argument on the Commission, but they thought to keep the issue alive, they would put it to referendum. And there is no doubt there are a lot of people on the island, I acknowledge this, who want to keep a parish link. Now, Clothier, oddly enough, did keep that parish link because the deputies were going to come out of the parishes.
Can you explain what you mean by lost the electoral argument on the constables? Because I think from their own numbers, I mean, from the representations they had, it was a fairly even split. So
yeah, but their report went for option A, as Mike is calling it, and option A was 6 super constituencies without the constables, Steve. But because they couldn't resolve in terms of public opinion, or in terms, okay, I'll admit this then perhaps, in terms of what was the debate within the Commission, they said, we can't resolve this, so we've got to go to the public.
Well, that's why it should be 2 separate questions. I agree, it should be 2 separate questions. They shouldn't be interlinked because it's not giving people enough option. I, for one, want to know once and for all whether people want the constables in the States or not. One simple question, in or out. If I'm out, I'm out. If I'm in, I'll carry on and I'll do the best job I can. But 2 separate questions.
There's confusion.
No, the point I was trying... Sorry
about butting in.
No, it's okay, Steve, not at all. The point I was trying to make was, if we had retained, and I'm not saying I would, if we had retained the Clothier in its purity, which is that the deputies stay within the parishes, of course they could be seen as the parish link, and then the constable's issue wouldn't be as major as it is. Because at the moment, if we move to big constituencies, people are very afraid that there will be, a lack of parish representation, and that you may, for example, in these large combinations of parishes, like the one in the north, you may get the deputies all from one particular area, for example.
There's a double whammy with this. It's not just in terms of the parishes. It's not only take the constables out of the States, it's taking the parishes out of the link full stop in terms of constituencies. And
yes.
It would be less of a worry to me if we still had a deputorial system based on parish boundaries, where myself as a constable that wasn't in the States had a parish deputy or deputies to go to if I had issues. Who do I go to after this if we're back into large constituencies? If I've got a parishioner who's got a problem?